there, welcome to Going Scared. I'm Jessica Honegger, founder of the world-changing brand Noonday Collection, and I am so glad that you are here. Our Going Scared community gathers here every week for direct and honest conversations that help you live a life of courage by leaving comfort and going scared. We are in the middle of our series called Know Thyself, and this series is your step-by-step guide to discover how to get to know yourself. And it has been amazing. I have learned so much. We've taken deeper dives into some things that I already knew about, and we're discovering new things. And we have created a digest for you. This digest is going to include links to take personality tests for free. It's going to include synopsises of some of the tools that you've heard about. And if you want that, then go subscribe to my email list. You can head on over to jessicahonegger.com or head on over to my Instagram where there is a link there. I would love for you to get your hands on this guide. All right, today's guest, Rich Villodas, and I wanted to have him on because he is so passionate about emotional health. Rich pastors a church in Queens with more than 75 countries represented. So self-awareness is critical for a job like his. I first discovered him through his book, The Deeply Formed Life, and he spends a beautiful chapter in that book talking about different aspects of self-examination that he focuses on. And so we walk through each of those different aspects today: emotional health, family of origin, examining your anxiety, examining your feelings. It's a really great conversation. Rich, it is so good to finally get to talk to you.
Jessica, thank you so much for the kind invitation. Look forward to a good conversation with you.
So your book, The Deeply Formed Life, it's so good. My friend, I think it was Jenny Allen. I was talking to her about something. She's like, you've got to go get this book by Rich. And I had not heard of your work, and now I'm totally obsessed. And oh my gosh, your Instagram one-liners that I'm sure they're on Twitter as well. I'm more active on Instagram. I seriously, like, if you go look at my saved posts, it's just you. It's just all Rich Villodas.
Well, really grateful. And for me, social media, I love when it's encouraging to people, but I'm trying to work out often what I'm thinking and what I believe on that platform. So it's kind of risky to do it that way, but I've enjoyed trying to make things succinct.
Yeah, but I know, and that's what's so powerful. But yeah, you've got a lot of humility there, so I appreciate it. We're all figuring out the good of this, and we're walking through it. So it's helpful to have pastors who are active there, just because it's marrying of the secular, the sacred, life on mission, and I really value your voice there. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we are smack dab in the middle of our series on self-awareness, and this is something I would say you specialize in, is this idea of self-examination. And you put it so succinctly in your last book, The Deeply Formed Life, and you said the goals of self-examination are threefold. First, through these practices, we open ourselves up to the grace and presence of God. The truth is, we're all in the same boat of needing a regular rhythm to help us grow in awareness of our blind spots, shadow sides, hidden sins. Second, we live in a world with greater freedom, untangling ourselves from the web of inner dysfunction, confusion. And the practice of looking within is not to be an act of masochism, but a choice to honor our own feelings without shame or judgment, which is so much easier said than done. Mm-hmm. And then you say, and that thirdly, that we become a presence in the world. And this is the part that I love and that I really loved about your work, is you just marry this contemplative inner world with how that looks in our embodied outer world reality on mission. And you say that we are capable of working towards peace with our neighbors and love for those who might be considered enemies. And, even Jesus himself on the Sermon on the Mount instructed us to take that way of self-examination. removing the logs from our own eyes that we might see the specks of dust in our neighbors. And let's face it, the world's in need of desperate need of people willing to examine their own selves before
Mhm.
examining others. Yes, can we get an amen? And we're so accustomed to viewing, judging, and comparing others rather than ourselves. So there's a million things you could have written about in this chapter, but you specifically write about examining family of origin, anxiety, and our feelings. So I'm going to have you go through each of those. But before that, even, what has been your journey towards becoming a more self aware human?
Yeah, I think so much of my own journey has to do with the people who God has put in my way, who have helped me ask questions of myself that it can be quite scary at times. And so having people, so my own journey, I think, whether it's professors, whether it's mentors, whether it's pastors, who have gently led me into my own inner excavation and interior examination. I wouldn't be able to do it without them. Becoming a Christian, I'm 42 years old. I became a Christian at 19. The language of interior examination or interiority was not present at all. And so getting a theology a few years later around the Psalms, when I would read the Psalms, I would read David and these other writers who just seemed so in tune with their interior life and had an ability to articulate their longings, their anxieties, their anger, their passion, their joy, sometimes in uninhibited ways. And I would read these Psalms and just see such a disconnect in my own life of, do I speak with this level of freedom? Am I in touch with what's happening inside of me? And so I think the Psalms were so important for me in modeling what kind of an emotionally healthy. I'm not sure if people look at the psalmist as like emotionally healthy, especially when there's some pretty bad psalms in there too. Some things that I would not want anyone to read in my own journal.
Right.
But what I think the psalmist gets at is there is a freedom, an ability to look within without shame and offer that before God. And so I think over the years, I have slowly grown into seeing this as not a secondary or tertiary issue in faith. This is a primary issue of faith. Am I familiar with myself? Am I using God to run from myself, or am I lifting mind and heart to God? And so the deeply formed life in these chapters on interior examination is, in many respects, trying to capture my own journey of self discovery and self awareness.
When you think about how you were experienced as a leader in your early 30s and how you are experienced now, what are some of those sort of outward changes that took place? Because that's what self-awareness does. It helps us become aware so that then we can then choose. And before you're just blind. Without awareness, you're blind. And so, usually, hopefully, that path of awareness leads us to choosing a path where we can now show up as peacemakers, which is
Hmm.
what you are in the world. That is one of your greatest gifts that you offer the world. So, I just want to hear about that journey because I'm sure it's not all Pollyanna.
No, it's not. I think what I've learned, number one, is I've had to grow in lots of self awareness regarding the power that I carry.
Mm,
That's probably been the biggest learning for me. That my words carry, especially in the community that I pastor, a church called New Life Fellowship in Queens, New York, a very large multi-ethnic church with people from over 75 nations represented. And it's quite a delicate place to be a pastor because there's so many differences. And so I've had to learn in my early 30s, a decade ago, I found myself a lot more flippant, I think,
mm.
and some of the words that I said and some of the opinions that I would articulate, whether it was on social media or otherwise. But what I've learned is a lot of people are looking to me for direction, for guidance. And if I'm not growing aware of the power that I steward and the ways that my words can hurt people, that's really bad leadership. And so I made some mistakes, I think, in my early 30s, and not that I'm not making mistakes today, but I think that's one area, probably the biggest area as a leader for me is growing an awareness of the power that I carry.
Mm. It can be almost a lonely discovery, though
Mm.
I know that you have amazing mentors and are part of this movement around emotional health, especially when it comes to spirituality. But I imagine you have a group of people you walk with where you can kind of say the things that you are using restraint in other areas of your life.
Oh yeah, I mean, besides my wife, of course, Rosie, who so grateful to have someone who I'm able to be incredibly honest with and really give expression to what's happening in my soul. And beyond her, I meet with three pastors the first Wednesday of each month, where we're able to talk freely about just the pressures, the stressors, the anxieties, the joys of being in leadership. And so having a space where I can regularly, and of course, I mean, having a therapist, I have seasonal therapy, spiritual direction. I need a lot of outlets
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
to continue to name what is true on the inside of my soul and grow in greater familiarity with myself.
I love that, to name what is true. I'm just started a group a couple months ago, and we call it a confessional community, and it is 7 female leaders. And sort of the purpose of the group is to be able to name our truest story so that we can become our truest selves on this journey. So I love that that's,
Beautiful.
yeah, how you identify that as. Okay, well, let's talk cuz about family of origin first.
Yeah.
Cuz it's interesting to me because even in this podcast series, we're talking about tools. So we're talking about EMDR, interfamily systems. We're speaking about, the Enneagram, of course, Strengths Finder, Myers Briggs. We're interviewing neurobiologists. We're covering this wide range. But as I was rereading this chapter, I thought, oh my gosh, like actually, I could do a whole podcast on family of origin. I mean, in some ways, we did do a podcast on attachment theory, which
Hmm.
very much has to do with family of origin. But yeah, I'm curious how you landed on these three, topics in particular that you encourage us to examine. So let's kick it off with family of origin.
Yeah, with family of origin, I was first introduced to the concept of family of origin in seminary, and I had to do a genogram, which was a tool that helps you trace your family from 2 to 3, 4 generations before you. And the goal is not just to put names on a family tree to see what was grandpa's name and great grandpa's name. The goal is to really identify what are the patterns, the traumas, and the scripts that have been handed down from one generation to the next, and how does our family of origin shape the way we live in the world today? In many ways, they're inconsistent with the way of Jesus. But it started there, and then going to New Life, where I pastor right now, I had the great privilege. My predecessor, a guy named by the name of Pete Scazzaro, he received his doctorate in family systems theory with a focus on the genogram. And so when I got
Mm,
to New Life, it was actually quite common that genogram work was part of our spiritual formation plan. That if
wow.
you're part of our congregation, we are going to lead you into doing your own genogram in various contexts to help you grow in greater awareness of the ways that your family has shaped you. And so one of the things that we say often is that Jesus may live in your heart, but grandpa lives in your bones, because we
So
have
true.
the very structures of our lives have been handed down by our families, and certainly there are positive legacies that we've been handed down and wonderful things that we are to cherish and treasure, and at the same time there's some negative legacies that we must learn to name and to resist. But that's how I got into it in seminary, and then coming to a church where the previous pastor utilize this, and from this point on we use it so often in so many different contexts at New Life as a tool of spiritual formation.
Mm, that's so good. I have done a lot of things, lots of therapy, lots of all the things, but I have not done a genogram.
There's an immediacy to the genogram, because there's something about actually patiently examining our families. And I understand that not everyone's going to have the same amount of information as the next person regarding our families for various reasons. But it's remarkable to see on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard or on a PowerPoint, what have you. These are the generations that have preceded, and these are the generational sins, the patterns that have been handed down, the earthquake events, the traumas, and then in light of all of that, I think perhaps for me at least, the most important facet of the genogram is not just identifying all that went wrong in our family. The real nugget is what are the conscious and unconscious internalized messages or the
Mm.
scripts that I live into day in and day out? And are those messages leading me into life or leading me to death? That's really the goal of the genogram. And there is an immediacy because we're able to see so much brokenness on the page. And I think it gives us an opportunity to begin to identify the ways that God wants to heal us.
Oh my gosh, so good. I'm like ready to go sign up for a Genogram conference.
We do it with actually we do it with every other year or so. We've done it with our pastoral team, and we've shared our genogram, and it's vulnerable, and at times it's a very emotional and painful, but it bonds us because what we all realize is we all come from families that have some brokenness, no matter where you're from. And our parents did the best that they probably could, and there's still significant amount of brokenness, and so it's quite bonding if you can do it in a small group, where we
Mhm.
pray for one another. But it truly is a gift to grow in self-awareness.
Oh, so good. So good. Okay, next you asked us to examine our anxiety, which of course just makes me cringe. I'm like, oh, that's where I carry a lot of my brokenness.
Yeah.
So
Well,
let's talk about
yeah.
that.
Well, anxiety is, first of all, anxiety is not about necessarily feelings of like timidity. People often associate anxiety with fear. And so which I sometimes I hear people say, well, I'm not a fearful person. I don't have anxiety. But anxiety is more than just feeling afraid. Anxiety is this automatic response to a real or perceived threat. And the ways that we respond automatically, sometimes it might be timidity and fear and panic. Other times it might be anger. Sometimes it's manipulation and control. Sometimes it's sleeping. I mean, there are various ways that we respond to what we feel is a perceived or a real threat. And so, first of all, just defining anxiety in that way is really important because I hear plenty of people say, "I'm not an anxious person," but to be human is to be anxious.
Mm.
It's Steve Cuss, a friend of mine. He wrote a book called Managing Leadership Anxiety, and it's a wonderful book. And that's kind of the premise of it. To be human is to be anxious, and our anxiety manifests in so many different ways. Now, the difference is identifying what is acute anxiety, which is situational, which is time based, this momentary loss of self composure. We all carry some acute anxiety. But then there's this chronic anxiety that is not specific to any threat. It's the kind of anxiety that you get an email from someone and you haven't even read it, but you just see their name and you're already flipping out. It's just like, what's happening there? What's going on in your soul? What are you carrying? And part of the spiritual life and part of growing in self awareness is paying attention to those automatic reactions that lurk beneath the surface and the ways that anxiety shows up. So it is certainly hard work, but it is good soul work for sure.
It is. Okay, I can't resist. I have been reading this book, barely just got it. It's called The Unopened Gift, A Primer in Emotional Literacy. My business
Mm.
partner recommended it to me. I happened to open it right up to this, little box that says a new view of anxiety, and I dog-eared the book. I'm a dog ear. You should see your book. It's highlighted, penciled, dog-eared. So I'm curious. I'm just going to read this to you, and because I'd never really heard it presented like this, I'd be curious what your response. It says, the emotional learning that has been most useful has to do with anxiety and the distinctions I've learned between anxiety fear, and doubt. I'd been living with a fair amount of anxiety around my health and, as a result, my future. Anxiety can be defined ontologically as the fear of some unknown threats.
Mm,
What I learned from Dan is to reflect and see if I can shift the anxiety into fear or doubt. And this is the part that I thought was really interesting. By shifting anxiety into fear of a specific threat, I'm able to take action to resolve or mitigate the threat.
mm,
Which is
mm,
interesting because my therapist has had me kind of like, well, what's the worst thing you can think of? What's the worst outcome? And to kind of actually logically and then he says, by transforming anxiety into doubt, I can see that this is something I've never done before, and therefore the doubt is not unwarranted. I can then call upon courage to proceed into this new territory. I now
mm,
view anxiety as a beginning point rather than a place to wallow, a call for inquiry and reflection to identify exactly what is causing me concern.
That's beautiful. The language that I try to use, I think that's pretty similar. Is how can I become more compassionately curious with myself
Mhm.
whenever anxiety surfaces? And so, what the excerpt you just read gets at is anxiety is being driven by the lizard brain, that part of our brain that
Mhm.
there is no thought to it. There is no getting outside of ourselves. It is full reaction to a perceived or real threat. But what you're getting at, that excerpt I love is it's moving it from that place of automatic reactivity and emotionality to how do I actually give significant thought, prayerful reflection, compassionate curiosity to what's actually happening in my life. So that's a beautiful excerpt.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting because usually you think like, "Okay, I wanna move from anxiety into peace."
You're right.
But this is like actually break down your anxiety and turn
Yes.
it into a fear or a doubt. And then it's like, okay, well, this is my fear. And then it's more of using that logical brain. Like, well, then what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? Okay, but then would I really be alone? No, because I've got, this person would help me in that situation. Or,
Right.
and then the doubt part is that compassionate, like, well, of course I'm doubting. I've never done this before. And anyway, but I've never just thought of moving anxiety into into fear. But actually that made sense to me. So
That's
thanks for
wonderful.
letting me indulge
Yeah.
myself. Okay, so the last idea here that you ask us to examine is our feelings.
Yeah, when it comes to the spiritual life, it's often the case that feelings are usually not even considered as part of the equation. It's usually like faith, it's whatever facts are before us, and then if we can get to feelings, then let's explore that. As opposed to as I mentioned earlier, the Psalms, we look at Jesus, we see fully integrated people, which is really the goal of emotional health. When I think about emotional health, I'm thinking of three words. I'm thinking about integrity, integration, and love.
Mm,
And integrity is not living something perfectly, but wrestling with something faithfully. Integration is holding all of my parts together and refusing to compartmentalize. And this is all for the sake of love. I'm not just trying to do this for the sake of navel gazing or just for self actualization. I want my life to be marked by love. And so, feelings, to pay attention to our feelings, leads us into number one, reality. What's actually happening? What am I
right.
feeling? And I think what it does produce in us, the more we are fluent and conversant with our own soul and the feelings that we have, the more we're able to be a good gift to other people who are experiencing the same. And so if I'm more conversant with my own anger, whenever I see someone angry, I think I can enter into that space a bit more lovingly. When I'm familiar with my own anxiety or my own sadness, and I see someone else experiencing those feelings, I think I'm able to be in their presence in a different way. And so, if the spiritual life is not giving us if the spiritual life that we're living is not giving us permission to feel, it is a Gnosticism, a Platonism. It's not the way of Jesus, that's for sure. And what I've discovered is in certain contexts, religious contexts, church contexts, it's often the case that we have one Bible verse about our feelings. and I've heard it in many different churches, is usually Philippians 4:4, where Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Like we should be rejoicing all the time. And the people who quote that, I mean, it's either maybe they ripped it out of their own Bible, but there's another book in the Bible called Lamentations. And so the question is it rejoice or is it how long, O Lord? And I think the answer is yes. It's we're holding all of these things together. And that's what paying attention to our feelings requires. I want to live the full human life. And sometimes it means feelings of joy. And sometimes it means feelings of grief and anxiety and anger.
So true. It's so true. Well, I love that you even use the term navel gazing. I told my Instagram followers I was going to be doing this series, and people were super excited. But then, of course, a couple of people were like, well, what's the point of self awareness? And isn't that selfish? And isn't it navel gazing? So I'd love for us to end with what's the cost of choosing this path of, I mean, really, it's a path of ignorance. If you just choose to not examine
Mhm.
yourself, what is the cost on us?
Yeah, and I think the cost. First of all, it's costly whichever way we go.
That will amen to that. That's
There's
true.
there's a cost. It is painful to look within, make no doubt about it. But just as painful and maybe even more painful is not looking within. I mean, part of sometimes people don't go to the doctor because they're afraid of looking within or having the
Mm,
doctor examine something on their body, and they rather live with this sense of happy obliviousness. That's okay. And then something that could have been taken care of now is much worse than it could have been. And so at some point, us refusing to do this hard work of looking within is going to lead to a whole new set of problems. And so it's a cost no matter which way we decide to go. However, I think the decision to actually do the hard work of looking within with friends, with God, recognizing God is with us, as painful as it is, I think ultimately leads to life. To avoid looking within, I think ultimately leads to greater problems and pain.
it truly is the ultimate act of courage, which is what this podcast is all about. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rich.
Well, thanks for having me. This is stuff I love to talk about. So thanks for the invitation.
All right. I feel like I could do a whole new podcast series now on the Genogram. That is a new tool that I had not heard of before. But if you want all of these tools at your fingertip, then head on over, subscribe to my email list, either on my website, jessicahonaker.com, or over on my Instagram. There's a link. We have created a Know Thyself digest for you where you can take different tests for free and have all of these resources at your fingertips. Today's music is by Ellie Holcomb, and I'm Jessica Honaker. Until next time, let's take each other by the hand and keep going scared.